Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
You have spent your whole life making sure everyone else was comfortable. And somewhere along the way, you forgot to ask if you were. Think about that for a second. Really sit with it. How many times have you said yes when every single cell in your body was screaming no? How many Sunday afternoons have you given away to the neighbor who needed a favor, to the adult child who needed rescuing again, to the committee that needed a volunteer, to the husband, the friend, the sister, while some quiet, tired part of you sat in the corner of your own chest waiting, just waiting for someone to ask how you were doing. And maybe the most painful part, you probably wouldn't have known what to say if they had. Because somewhere between your 30s and now, you learned something dangerous. You learned that your needs were the last thing on the list. That asking for space made you selfish. That saying no made you difficult. That protecting your peace, God forbid, made you cold. So you kept giving. You kept showing up. You kept shrinking yourself into whatever shape the room needed you to be. And you called it love. I want to tell you something that no one may have ever said to you directly, and I want you to let it land somewhere real inside you. That wasn't love. Not entirely. Some of it, a lot of it, was fear. Fear that if you stopped being useful, you'd stop being wanted. Fear that if you said, I can't right now, the people you love would leave, or pull away, or look at you differently. Fear that your value, your worth as a woman, as a mother, as a friend, as a human being, was somehow tied to how available you were. How accommodating, how endlessly, quietly, exhaustingly there. And here's what that fear costs you. Not in some abstract, self-help book kind of way. I mean in the real, Tuesday morning, standing at your kitchen sink kind of way. It cost you your mornings. The ones where you wake up already calculating what everyone else needs before your feet hit the floor. It cost you your opinions. The ones you swallow at the dinner table because you don't want to start something. It cost you your friendships slowly because you keep giving to people who never learn to give back. And one day you realize you're exhausted by the very people who are supposed to fill you up. It costs you your health, your sleep, your ability to sit in a quiet room and actually feel, okay, it costs you yourself. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, but this is just who I am. I'm a caregiver. This is how I was raised. My mother was this way. Her mother was this way. And yes, maybe so. But let me ask you something gently, the way a good friend would ask you over coffee, leaning across the table with kind eyes. How's that working for you? Not for them. For you. Because here's the unspoken truth that women of our generation were never really given permission to say out loud, being a good person does not require you to disappear. You can be warm and have limits. You can be generous and protect your energy. You can love deeply and still say, I'm not available for that. These things are not opposites. We were just told they were. Setting a boundary isn't a wall. I want you to hear that, because the word boundaries has been so misused, so weaponized by pop psychology, that it can feel clinical, cold. Like something a therapist tells you to do that will somehow make everyone in your life furious with you. But a real boundary, a true boundary, is nothing more than a sanctuary you build around the things that matter most to you. It's the moment you say, I love you, and I cannot carry this for you. It's the moment you stop answering the phone at 10 o'clock at night, not because you don't care, but because you finally care about your rest enough to protect it. It's the moment you sit at that table and say what you actually think, even if your voice shakes a little. It's small, it's quiet, it's profoundly, radically yours, and it might be the most loving thing you ever do for yourself and honestly for the people around you too. Because when you stop running on empty, when you stop performing an endurance act disguised as virtue, you become more present, more real, more you. The woman underneath all that giving, she's been waiting a long time. She deserves to come home. Let's go a little deeper now. Because understanding that you have a boundary problem is one thing. Understanding why it feels so impossibly hard to say no, why the guilt arrives before you've even finished the sentence, why you lie awake replaying a conversation where you finally stood up for yourself and somehow still feel like you did something wrong. That's where the real work begins. And this isn't about blame. I want to be clear about that from the start. This is about seeing. Because you cannot change what you refuse to look at. So let's look. For most women in our generation, and I mean women who grew up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the message about who you were supposed to be started arriving before you were old enough to question it. It came through your mother, the way she quietly absorbed everyone's moods and made them her responsibility, the way she never complained, never asked for help, wore her exhaustion like a badge she wasn't allowed to show. You watched her. Children always watch. And your nervous system logged that data like a little scientist. This is what women do. This is what love looks like. This is how you earn your place. It came through school, through church, through every movie and television show that rewarded the woman who sacrificed and punished. Sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly, the one who dared to put herself first. It came through the quiet whispers of family systems that needed a peacekeeper. Maybe that was you. Maybe from a very young age, you became the one who read the room, who smoothed things over, who knew when dad's mood was shifting and rearranged yourself accordingly, who kept the peace not because you chose to, but because somebody had to, and you were good at it. And being good at something, even something that costs you, is its own kind of trap. Here's what I want you to understand about that little girl. The one who learned to make herself small, to be agreeable, to anticipate everyone else's needs before her own were even formed. She was doing something brilliant. She was surviving. In the environment she grew up in, being attuned to others, being flexible, being the one who never caused trouble. That kept the peace. Maybe it kept her safe. Maybe it kept the family together. Maybe it just meant she didn't have to face a look of disappointment from someone whose love felt conditional. It worked. For then, the tragedy isn't that she learned to do it. The tragedy is that she never got permission to stop. So here you are, 55, 65, 70 years old. And that same little girl is still running the show in some deep, quiet corner of your nervous system, still scanning the room, still shrinking, still calculating the cost of saying no before she even considers whether yes is something she actually wants to give. And this is where the guilt lives, isn't it? That guilt. Oh, that heavy, immediate, reflexive guilt. Someone asks you for something you genuinely cannot give right now, and before you can even form a polite response, guilt has already arrived, unannounced, uninvited, and settled itself right in the center of your chest. I want to name something about that guilt because I think it's one of the most misunderstood feelings women carry. That guilt is not a moral compass. I know it feels like one. I know it presents itself like one, like it's telling you that you're doing something wrong, that you're being selfish, that you're failing someone who needs you. But guilt that arrives the moment you try to take up a little space, that guilt is old. That guilt belongs to a younger version of you, in an older set of circumstances, where the stakes were very different. That guilt is a memory wearing the costume of a conscience. And you've been listening to it for decades. There's another layer here that I don't want to skip past, because I think for women in this season of life, it carries particular weight. So many of you have spent your lives being needed. And being needed, as painful as the exhaustion gets, as depleting as it becomes, it also feels like something. It feels like purpose, like proof that you matter, like evidence that your presence in this world has value. And so when someone suggests that you pull back, that you stop over giving, that you start protecting some of your time and energy for yourself, something in you panics. Because underneath the exhaustion, underneath the resentment you maybe haven't fully let yourself feel yet, there's a frightening question hiding. If I stop being needed, who am I? That's the real wound. Not the boundary itself, not even the guilt. It's the identity that got built on top of self-erasure. It's the version of yourself that was so thoroughly defined by your role. Mother, caregiver, helper, fixer, the one who holds it all together, that the idea of stepping back from that role feels less like rest and more like disappearing. I see that. I really do. And I want to say this as gently and as firmly as I know how your worth was never the sum of your usefulness. You were a full, complete, irreplaceable human being before you ever did a single thing for anyone. Before you raised those children, before you held that family together, before you showed up for everyone who needed you, you were already enough. The world just forgot to tell you that. And after a while, you forgot too. So here is where we begin to turn. Not with a checklist, not with a script of things to say the next time someone asks too much of you. We'll get there, but that's not the foundation. The foundation is this: you are allowed to exist for yourself. Not just for your children, not just for your marriage, not just for the people whose lives are better because you're in them, though I know how much that matters to you. For yourself. Your rest is not laziness. Your limits are not abandonment. Your no is not rejection. And the quiet, persistent whisper inside you, the one that says, I'm tired, I need something, I deserve a little of what I keep giving away, that isn't weakness. That's wisdom. That's the most honest voice in the room. And it has been waiting so patiently for you to finally stop long enough to hear it. It's time to listen. So we've sat with the wound. We've looked at where it came from, how it formed, why it stayed. And I hope something in the last few minutes felt like recognition. Like finally seeing a familiar face in a photograph you've been staring at for years without quite knowing who it was. That recognition matters. But recognition alone won't change your life. At some point, knowing has to become doing. And I won't pretend that part is easy. Because this is where most women I've spoken with, women just like you, hit a wall. They understand everything. They nod along, they feel the truth of it in their bones. And then someone calls and asks for something they don't have to give, and the old pattern kicks in before they've even had a chance to think. Yes slips out like muscle memory. So let's talk about the actual, real, imperfect, sometimes uncomfortable practice of learning to draw a line. Not perfectly, not all at once, but honestly and with intention. The first thing I want to dismantle is this idea that a boundary has to be a confrontation. Because that's the image, isn't it? Somewhere in your mind, setting a boundary looks like a difficult conversation around a tense kitchen table, or a tearful phone call, or someone walking away angry while you stand there wondering if you just broke something that can't be fixed. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that does happen. I won't lie to you about that. But most boundaries, most of them are quiet. They don't announce themselves with a speech. They don't require an apology or an explanation or a 2-hour conversation about your childhood. Most boundaries are just a pause before you answer, a breath you take before you automatically say yes, a moment where you ask yourself, genuinely, kindly ask yourself, do I actually want to do this? Do I have the energy for this right now? Is this something I'm choosing freely or something I'm doing because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? That pause, that single, quiet pause, that's where everything begins to shift. Now let's talk about the language, because the words matter, and I think one of the reasons women avoid boundaries is that they don't quite know what to say. They're afraid of sounding harsh. They're afraid of hurting someone. They want to be honest without being brutal, firm without being cold. And here's the good news you can be. You don't have to say, I'm setting a boundary with you. You don't need the clinical vocabulary. You just need a few simple phrases that feel true in your mouth and kind in their delivery. Things like, I love you, and I can't take that on right now. I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine waking up one morning, not too far from now, and lying in bed for just a moment before the day begins. And instead of your mind immediately cataloging everyone else's needs, instead of the mental to-do list that starts before your eyes are fully open, there's just a breath, a quiet, a sense of I am here, and today is mine to move through at my own pace. Not every morning. I'm not promising you a fairy tale, but some mornings. More mornings than you've had in a long time. Imagine sitting across from your daughter, or your friend, or your sister, and actually being present with her. Not performing presence while mentally tracking 17 other things, not half, listening while calculating what she might need from you and whether you have it to give. Actually there. Actually you. Because here's what no one tells you about running on empty for years. It doesn't just exhaust your body. It steals your presence. It makes you a ghost in your own life. Going through all the right motions, showing up in all the right places, but never quite fully there because there's nothing left to bring. When you start honoring your limits, when you start treating your own energy as something worth protecting, you don't become less available to the people you love. You become more. There's something else that happens too, and I find it one of the most quietly beautiful parts of this whole journey. You start to know yourself again. Or maybe for the first time, really know yourself, not the version of you that exists in relation to everyone else, Not the mother you, the wife you, the always available friend you. Just you. What do you actually enjoy? Not what you've convinced yourself you enjoy, because it fits neatly into the life you've been living. What lights something up in you? What makes time move differently? What have you set aside? A creative impulse, a dream, a simple pleasure, a way of spending a Tuesday afternoon, because it felt indulgent or inconvenient or like something you'd get to someday. Someday has a way of never arriving unless you decide it's today. I've spoken with women who, in their 60s, discovered they were painters. Women who, after decades of cooking for everyone else, finally learned to cook something they actually wanted to eat. Women who started saying no to the obligatory family gatherings that drained them, and yes to the solo road trips, or the book clubs, or the long, aimless walks that filled them back up, and in doing so, became people their families actually wanted to be around again. Not because they became selfish, because they became real. And I want to speak directly, tenderly, to the women who are in the later chapters of this life. The 70s, the losses, the season where the world has perhaps taken more than it's given recently. If you have lost a partner, if your children are grown and gone and the house is quieter than you ever imagined it would be, if your body is reminding you in ways both gentle and not so gentle that time is a real and finite thing, I want to say this to you especially, it is not too late. I know how that can sound, like a greeting card, like a platitude someone stitches on a pillow. But I mean it in the plainest, most literal sense. The years ahead of you, however many they are, deserve to be lived by someone who is actually present in them, who is actually choosing them, who is spending her time and her energy in ways that feel true, not just obligatory. You have earned the right to take up space. You have more than earned it. And if there are people in your life who have benefited from your endless giving, who make you feel guilty for finally, at this point in your life, wanting something for yourself, I want you to hear this with the love it's intended. Their discomfort with your growth is not your responsibility to fix. Let me also say something about the ripple effect, because I think it matters. When you change, when you start showing up as someone with limits, with needs, with a self that she actually tends to, you change the people around you too. Not always comfortably, not always immediately, but think about the younger women watching you. Your daughters, your granddaughters, the nieces, the neighbors, the young women at your church or in your community who have absorbed their own version of the same story you were handed. Every time you say no with grace, every time you ask for what you need without apologizing for it, every time you demonstrate that a woman can be loving and boundaried, warm and whole, you are rewriting a story that has been passed down through generations of women who deserved better and didn't know they were allowed to say so. You are not just healing yourself, you are breaking a chain, and that is not a small thing. That is one of the most profound, most quietly radical acts a woman can perform. To look at the inheritance of self-erasure that was handed to her, and to say, this stops with me. I will pass something different forward. So where do you begin? Right now, today, with all of this sitting in your chest, you begin small. You begin imperfectly. You begin exactly where you are. Maybe today it's just the pause, the breath before the automatic yes, the moment where you check in with yourself before you check in with everyone else. Maybe it's one conversation you've been avoiding, one relationship where the give and take has been so imbalanced for so long that even you have stopped noticing the weight of it. Maybe today you just notice. You don't have to act yet. Just see it clearly without the fog of habit and obligation clouding your view. Maybe it's something smaller still. Maybe it's closing your laptop at a reasonable hour. Maybe it's not answering the phone during the one quiet hour of your day that you've been silently protecting, but never quite claimed as yours. Maybe it's telling the truth when someone asks how you're doing, instead of reflexively saying fine while something tired and true goes unspoken inside you. Start there, in the small, honest, everyday moments. Because that's where real change actually lives. Not in the grand gestures, not in the dramatic declarations, but in the accumulation of tiny choices that slowly, steadily reshape the landscape of your life. I want to end here, in this quiet space between us, with something I need you to really hear. You are not too old for this. You are not too set in your ways. You are not too far down the road to change direction. The woman you were before the world started telling you to make yourself smaller. She is not gone. She has never been gone. She's been there this whole time, underneath the roles and the responsibilities and the beautiful, exhausting, decades-long labor of loving everyone around you. She has been waiting with extraordinary patience for you to remember her, to choose her, to come home to her. And when you do, not perfectly, not all at once, but gradually, tenderly, with the same grace you have always extended everyone else, something remarkable happens. You stop being tired in that deep, bone-level way that no amount of sleep seems to fix. Not because your life suddenly becomes easier, but because you stop fighting yourself. You stop carrying the weight of a self you've been abandoning for years. You put down what was never yours to carry. And in that moment, in that quiet, revolutionary, deeply personal moment, you don't just set a boundary, you come home. And home, after all this time, it feels like enough. It feels like more than enough. It feels like everything.